Wednesday, March 30th. Happy hump day to everybody that is observing that. And cue to the what were those? What was that Geico that had the camel
Hump day
commercials?
commercial. Yep.
There you go. So there you go. Let's go to a Geico commercial. This isn't sponsored by Geico. This is the Pack a Day podcast here on Pack a Day here, obviously, like I mentioned. I'm your host tonight. I am Jacob Westendorf, and this is my final show for a little while. I guess that's subject to change as always, but I wanted to bring back a good friend of mine. That's Paul Bretl. You've seen him. He has his own YouTube channel, writes for Cheesehead TV, and is the mastermind at Dairyland Express, the hardest working man in Packers blogosphere as far as I'm concerned, and now the father of a 2-year-old. So happy late birthday to little Reagan, and happy to see that she looked like she had a very fun second birthday over the weekend. And Paul, soon enough, thinking about maybe Reagan having a new title added to her name?
Yeah, I first off appreciate that introduction, but yeah, we had a fun weekend with family, and she got lots and lots of gifts. Her favorite is her bike, so we've already done a lot of pushing around on that, even though it still is about 30 degrees outside, fighting through it. But yeah, it was a really fun weekend.
There you go. So that was good to hear. Happy to hear that. And then Reagan's going to be the general manager of the Packers here in a couple of weeks. That's what I was trying to get Paul to say. But
Gotcha.
for when Gutekunst retires. But apparently didn't set that up all that well, and that's okay. Moving forward, the Packers are not in season, obviously, and we're getting a little bit closer to the draft. And Matt LaFleur spoke today at the NFL owners meetings, and they had their coaches breakfast this morning. Not a lot that stuck out. You talked about Devontae Adams. We've talked about that quite a bit. He called Rich Bisaccia a prick, which then prior to that asked if he could say the P word, which I thought was funny because that's not the P word that came to my mind when he had said that. But good for him. He wanted to keep it clean for the kids since this is a family-friendly program. One thing that did stick out a little bit is just talk about how, in terms of the receiving core and replacing Devontae and then Marquez Valdez-Scantling, was he said they needed some speed in the room and they need a legit speed guy. And Paul, what I talked about over the weekend when we talked about big needs for this team was that I did talk about some speed stuff, but I also did say that the reason, like the Packers, you talk about Jarvis Landry, Julio Jones, Will Fuller, like these receivers that are on the market. I think Green Bay could sign them whenever they wanted to. Mm-hmm. The fact that they haven't tells me they're trying to do something bigger. And we've heard that the Chiefs are trying to make a trade for a top receiver. We've heard that the Jets are keeping tabs, and they name names: A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel. I mean, you never know until you ask, right? I suppose with some of those, because like the 49ers would be stunned if they traded Deebo Samuel, but maybe another team will trade somebody else. That's my thought on that. But what's your take just really quickly on this receiver situation and LaFleur saying that they needed speed?
Yeah, the thing with those free agents on the market still, I went over a number of them at Dairyland Express recently. They all come with a but. Julio Jones, could step in, even though he's past his prime, be that high volume target, win in all three phases of the field, but he's played in 19 games last 2 seasons. OBJ would be the best option out there, but when's he going to be back on the field? Even Jarvis Landry, could take that high volume targets for the Packers, but he plays in the slot. Not that you can't upgrade it, but you already have Randall Cobb, Amari Rodgers when you're trying to kind of diversify that receiving core because there's a number of needs that need to be filled. They all come with buts. So I agree that I think the Packers I have to imagine they've at least made some calls on the trade market, but they're probably not going to be in any sort of rush. There's still a number of receivers on, Will Fuller, another receiver's in free agency that they can sign. And I'm guessing they're going to kind of see how the draft goes at this point, before fully maybe making that addition in free agency, although I do think there is some value to adding a veteran just for some stability, which this room does need. But when it comes to the speed aspect of it, MVS took some flack here during his time in Green Bay, but he played a very important part of this offense. There's obviously the big play ability that he generated, and it's not a coincidence that Green Bay's big play percentage in the passing game took a somewhat significant dip from 2020 to 2021. He missed 7, 8, 9 games throughout the season, but it's everything else that he adds to. I mean, when you have a guy with 4.37 speed, he's going to draw the attention of the safeties. That creates better spacing, can open things up in the passing game for other receivers. I think the 49ers game in the playoffs was a really good example of what can happen when you don't have that element. 49ers secondary really wasn't too scared of being beat over the top. everyone's a little closer to line of scrimmage. Things are more condensed. Moving the ball through the air is more difficult. So having that big playability or even just that speed to worry about does a lot more than create a home run play for the Packers offense. So that's definitely an element that they're going to have to add in the draft, most likely would be my guess. And that's why I thought that a reunion with Valdez-Scantling once Devontae was traded would have made a lot of sense. I think he obviously got priced out of Green Bay's what they were willing to pay, understandably so, but that's why I thought a reunion made sense. But yeah, this is an element that this offense has to have if they're going to be firing on all cylinders.
Yeah, and you've seen that. It's not just with MVS. If you go back to like the 2015 Packers, and I know that's quite some time ago at this point, but Jordy's knee explodes in a preseason game, and they have Devontae. Devontae eventually gets hurt. They have Cobb, who was in his prime at the time, but they just didn't have anybody to scare you over the top. Jeff Janis, for all the fanfare, stunk. Jared Abbrederis, that's not what he was, and they just didn't have a speed guy at that point, and they didn't have it this year. With MVS, the conversation was, what does he add to the offense that's not in the box score? And there's certainly something that you touched on all of those things. What I like about what they did with Valdez-Scantling, though, is what he adds outside of the box score doesn't make him worth more money than or a lot more money, I should say, than what he adds to the box score. So when you're talking about, he had one game this year where he had a big game. He had that big game against Minnesota, had a big game against Baltimore. So he had two actually, but they need a little more consistency and a little more added to the actual box score production. So they need to find somebody that can replace that element while also adding some things, like I said, to the box score, tangible results, in addition to the intangible stuff, which is the take the ball off the top type thing. So they can do both of those things. Real quick, before we put the receiver stuff to bed, I did ask this question in one of my group chats today. So one word answer, yes or no, the Packers had a veteran receiver at some point this offseason.
Yes.
Okay, and now my other question is over under. So over means during the draft or after. Under means before the draft. They add that veteran receiver over under before the draft.
Over, so draft or after.
Draft or after. I'm with you on draft or after as well. So I'm interested to see how that's all going to play out. These waves of free agency are exciting, and it's kind of cool to look at. I said today earlier on Twitter that you look at the list of all these free agents that are still available. It's not just receivers, Tyrann Mathieu, Bobby Wagner, Devion Clowney, those guys out there. And I'm like, we're kind of at the point now where there's a reason these guys are available. That they're and it may even be more than meets the eye. Like we may not even know what it could be contract related. It could be money related. It could be that teams are worried about injury situations or something that we're not aware of. There's a lot of different things going on, but it's not as simple as, oh my God, how is Tyrann Mathieu still a free agent? Clearly there's a reason. And the NFL may not think as highly of him as maybe that we do around the league. That being said, I have said this and I will keep my promise. If the Packers sign Tyrann Mathieu, I will not wear pants for a month. So just keep that in mind. If that does happen, I will not wear pants for a month. Let's move to
unrelated note. Jacob's looking for a job.
Unrelated. Yeah. Yes. Can I please find one of them work from home gigs just on the off chance it happens? Because then I don't have to. Let's go to the offensive line, because I did have a take today and I wanted to catch yours on it. The Packers over the years have very clearly in the draft added or emphasized adding big people in the early portions of the draft, especially the first couple of rounds. And the first round, really specifically, unless it's a quarterback or a defensive back, it's been a big person, offensive lineman, line of scrimmage defender. I think that could be a case for where the Packers could go in the first round this year. But some of the things that we've talked a lot about thresholds and what the Packers typically value and RAS scores and all this other stuff that come into play as to predicting who the Packers might select. Well, my take is that the guys that the Packers have and things that they have typically valued, lower ages, shuttle time, stuff like that, they don't coincide with the guys that are coming in the first round. One of the offensive tackles is 25 years old. Kenyon Green, I saw the other day, I was intrigued by him because he's younger and his player comp was Elton Jenkins. I'm like, well, they loved Elton Jenkins. That's like one of the favorite picks Matt LaFleur's ever had for this team. And his athletic scores don't match up with what Green Bay has typically valued in the past. Tyler Linderbaum is a really good player. He's small and he's shorter, or he's got shorter arms, and he's a center only. Typically not something the Packers have valued, even if he is a really good player, and he is. So to my Iowa Hawkeye friends, I am sorry. Yes, he's very good. Just probably not going to be a Packer. I am of the belief because when I do my mock drafts, a lot of them end up being like edge rushers and small people, receivers, defensive backs, stuff like that. It's like they're not going to address the trenches. Like that's the first thing they always ask. I'm like, I think my belief is the last 2 years, Gutekunst has taken 3 offensive linemen on the 3rd day of the draft. I think he's taken 3 guys hoping to hit on one, and that's happened. You see if Royce Newman, we'll see on that. But John Runyon is very good. Well, he's good. I don't know about very good, but he's good. And they've done that the last couple of years. And I still think they'll add a free agent offensive lineman at some point here as we hit down the stretch of free agency and in the second wave. But my bold prediction, and I don't even know if this is bold, so I put it as a question mark, but my take was that the Packers are going to do that again. They are going to load up, I think, on the first 3 rounds. They have 5 picks in the first 3 rounds. I think if they keep all 5 of those picks, that a majority of them will be, there might be an edge rusher and a defensive lineman. And otherwise, if they pick guys on offense, it'll be pass catchers, receivers, tight ends, maybe a running back, but I sincerely doubt that's something they would do early. So I said all that to say, what is your take on the Packers and adding offensive linemen? Do you think that's something that they might do early? Or are you like me and thinking they'll do it again day 3 and into the undrafted free agency portion of things?
I do see what you just laid out taking place. I don't think they're going to draft an interior offensive lineman early on. That's just something I know. Elton Jenkins in the 2nd round and Josh Myers, kind of disproving this as I'm speaking. But the day 3 offensive linemen that they did take were all, I think, going to be at the NFL level. Even though Royce played tackle, Cole Van Lanen played tackle, I think they're better off along the interior. But I could see Green Bay going the route of offensive tackle just because it is a premier position. There is some question marks on depth. Sounds like, or at least our thoughts are that Yash is going to be the right tackle come week 1. Hopefully hold things down until Elton Jenkins get back. Bakhtiari will be at left tackle. But going into the season, you don't necessarily, at least at this stage where the roster is, and there's obviously a lot of time, they don't have that depth that they've had in years past. So
and on the Elton part real quick, before we move, just kind of put that to bed, are you like me and basically not resigned to, because that makes it sound like a bad option, but like Elton Jenkins is going to be the right tackle when he's healthy, right?
Yeah, I think so, especially because we look at their draft picks the last couple of years that you've mentioned. They've taken 6 on day 3 the last 2 years combined. They're all been interior players or players who we
now I tell you hang out with Mark Eckel a lot. That's an Eckel point right there.
So I think that was made knowing that, or operating under the assumption that, yep, when the time comes, maybe it doesn't, but if it does, we're going to move Elton to that spot. So I don't see them taking an interior player within the first 3 rounds. If the right tackle was available, I do think they would do that. However, why I could see what you laid out happening is I don't know that player is going to be available. This is a very top heavy offensive tackle class. There might be 4 or 5 taken in the top 15, 20 or so. But by the time you get to the Green Bay Packers point of the draft, I know I've seen Central Michigan's Bernard Ryman. I think he's 25 though, and as
he's
you said,
old. Yeah, he's old as hell. Like,
so that's not what the Packers typically do.
No.
And then you get into round 2, and at least off the top of my head, I'm not sure if there's anyone that stands out when the Packers would be available. And then you're getting into round 3, and again, they're picking at the back end of that. A name that I do like, who maybe is available in round 3, is Abe Lucas from Washington State. But again, what the Packers think, or so I absolutely see why what you just laid out could take place. And if I was betting, I probably would, because even when I'm doing the mock drafts, like offensive tackle is 100% on my radar, but I haven't made that selection yet for all the reasons we've just discussed. But if the Packers feel like the right offensive tackle's there, I could certainly see them making that move at that point. But that's where my question lies. I don't know that player is going to be. And as you said, if they sign a Dennis Kelly type in June, Elton Jenkins, he'll be back October, November, maybe, just guessing, hopefully, obviously. But then when that time comes, now you have Jenkins and Bach starting, you have Yash maybe as your swing and a veteran to lean on. Like, that's a really strong group right there. So the depth can quickly come back even without making that selection.
Yeah, and I am curious to see, because every year, and I pointed this out over the weekend, every year since Gutekunst has been the general manager, he signed a free agent and he's drafted an offensive lineman. Sometimes that free agent is Byron Bell, and they've had varying degrees of success. Actually, honestly, on the offensive line side of things, Bell's the only one that stunk.
Mhm.
Rick Wagner was good. Billy Turner was very good. And Dennis Kelly was good enough. I wouldn't call him anything more than, good enough. He was probably replacement level at tackle, which at that point, it's really all you were looking for out of him at that point, once he has to start in a playoff game or something like that. So I anticipate that's something that'll happen at some point in this wave of free agency. And I also anticipate, like you said, a few guys on day 2, day 3. It just doesn't seem to line up for them to take an offensive tackle for what they have done. And granted, they've broken thresholds before. Jair Alexander, they said they changed the threshold so he fit it. Randall Cobb was an exception. Amari Rodgers was a rather large exception last year. So they have examples. There are rules in place for a reason, and that's not to say they won't do it. It's just we're predicting likelihoods, and it doesn't seem likely, in my estimation at least, that Green Bay does that. So we'll see. One name you mentioned on day 2, maybe he interests them. I'm not sure, but Daniel Fa'alele.
Yep, that's someone else.
He's maybe, but I don't know. I don't know. They'd have to break a couple trends for that as well. Let's go.
He's a tough one to project because just a sheer size. Like, obviously some of those testing numbers might not be where other players are at, but other players are 6'8", 380 or whatever.
Yeah, he's a 1 out of 1. Owen Reese said the other day that this is a guy who comes around once a decade, and maybe you want to be the one who takes that guy. But yeah, that's my take on the offensive line. We'll see how that plays out. I do reserve the right to change my mind. Let's go to Mike Clay. He's an ESPN NFL prognosticator. And one of his things that's funny, it says Prison Mike is biased against your favorite team, which I think is funny. But it's just kind of going through and he's grading each position group for each individual team. And it's on, a certain point of the scale. And I believe that the highest it can go is 4. Actually, I believe that's how that works. So going through this, because at this time of year, we're always talking about what the team doesn't have. What do they need? What can't they add? Where are their weaknesses? And if you look through this roster, and these are just one man's grades, but the Packers are in very good shape throughout most of their roster. Actually, if you look at this, view it like a heat map in baseball. Red is good, blue not so good. White is about league average. So when you go through the entire group, they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 positions in red, 1 that's white, and 2 are in the blue. The 2 are in the blue that are exactly the ones you are probably thinking of right now. Wide receiver and tight end. Those are ranked very poorly, and those are positions I anticipate Green Bay, at least receiver, maybe not tight end, but we'll see on that. But I do anticipate Green Bay adding to those rooms, at least one of them, if not both, between now and then. But the part that is nice about it is when you go through this roster, it's very strong. That's the thing for everybody that's doing the whole sky is falling and we're not sure about this team. And I understand some of that. I do. I can promise you right now, I won't pick the Packers to win the Super Bowl. Can't trust them. But they're going to be in the mix, assuming the relative health. They're going to be in the mix because it's a very good roster. Quarterback, they're ranked highest in the league. They have a 4.0 on there. And that takes into account, obviously, Jordan Love and Paul's best friend, Kurt Benkert, being on the roster as well. The running back group, 3.1 out of 4. That's A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones. Offensive line, defensive line, both spots in the trenches are ranked really highly. The one surprise to me, I guess, was on the edge. Rashawn Gary and Preston Smith, that gave them a 2.5 grade. I am guessing that is largely because of the guys that are behind them and guys we've talked about quite a bit as far as being able to maybe need to replace some of those guys. Linebacker was a 2.1, cornerback 3.8, and safety 3.4. So, Paul, I just went through all of those grades. Which one of those stands out the most to you as far as maybe that's better than you thought it was, or maybe that's a little lesser than you thought it might be?
The interior defensive line being a 3.5 is a little surprising to me. Obviously, you have Kenny Clark, Dean Lowry from a pressure standpoint coming off a career year. But with that, I think we should all expect a little regression because, again, it was a career year. They just added Jerron Reed, who's been proven that he can be durable, can be on the field, can hold his own against the run, against the pass. But, again, he's another rotational player. TJ Slayton is, I like what his skill set can bring, someone that you can plug in the middle, give you the flexibility to move Kenny Clark around more for more one-on-ones. I love that skill set, but he's a 5th round player in his second year with minimal experience. And then Jack Heflin.
And they didn't really do that with him last year either.
No,
like, that was the other thing. They didn't do anything like that with him last year.
And then Jack Heflin, an undrafted rookie entering his second season. Again, very, very few snaps. I think 10 or 15 last season. So, I mean, just as a whole, that's a thin position group, even though you have, you probably have, your top three guys in Reed, Lowry, and Clark, unless they, add a premium draft pick to that. But still being ranked that high because, again, Jerron Reed, I did really like the addition, but again, he's not a superstar by any means. He's going to be a rotational player. Dean Lowry, we know who he is at this point, solid rotational player, but there's nothing that leaped off the page that was going to be the Packers' third highest rated position group behind only quarterback and cornerback.
Yeah, when you get the general Twitter complaints, that's like one of the first ones usually. Get Kenny help. Mm-hmm. And I understand that. When you start talking about the defensive line, something that was interesting that I didn't talk about over the week, but was Gutekunst and LaFleur both mentioning Jerron Reed's addition, but they also, and Gutekunst said, added a fourth to the rotation. And he mentioned TJ Slayton by name. So that is somebody that they are very clearly, at least in my opinion, counting on as we get into camp and everything else. But I still think, like you said, they need to add somebody at that position. Just get some long-term. Reed may not be here next year. Dean Lowry may not be here next year. And TJ Slayton, like you said, he's a fifth-round rookie. That was surprising.
Yeah, that's the important thing, as we go through mock drafts and create our own, go to like over the cap and pull up the Packers 2023 roster and look at those positions. Safety right now, Vernon Scott's the only one under contract. You just mentioned Slayton and Clark are the only interior defensive players under contract. There's several positions like that. Tight end, Josiah DeGore is the only player under contract in 2023. So I know we want to find immediate contributors, and hopefully the Packers do, especially since they're pushing for that Super Bowl, but draft's also about planning ahead as well. And there's positions like that they're going to have to address at some point. And obviously the draft is a good place to do so.
And 11 selections will certainly help them do that. And 4 in the top 65 in the top 100. I am just hoping for a third-round pick that doesn't actively stink. That is my personal goal on this. As far as mine, what stuck out, I guess safety was rated a little higher than I thought it might be. Adrian Amos is a solid player, but I don't know that he's highly thought of outside of circles in Green Bay just because he doesn't have the sexy numbers to go with everything. And Darnell Savage was a disappointment last year as far as most of us are considered. You're talking about guys that, not under contract beyond 2022. I imagine they'll use the fifth-year option on Savage, but I don't know if they'll do that. And part of the discussion of, like, in my mock draft over the weekend, I drafted Daxton Hill. And what I said was he could take over for Savage or Amos. And, like, the fact that it's not a slam dunk if he's taking over for Amos, because the Packers very easily, they traded up for this dude in the first round, drafted him. They talked very highly of him. The fact that that's not a slam dunk to me speaks at least some volumes about the kind of player he hasn't been yet. Now, that can change. It took Nick Collins a long time to become a really good player. Maybe Savage will do that. He has shown flashes of that. But and then you look at the rest of Henry Black's not around anymore. Vernon Scott is there. They don't have another, it's not like they're loaded with depth at that position either, to where you're like Tampa Bay, for example. I remember NFC Championship game when Green Bay played against them. Antoine Winfield's hurt. Jordan Whitehead steps in, and it's just like, oh, okay. He's really good too. They got a bunch of dudes that way. Green Bay doesn't have that.
The safety position, what I'm kind of holding out hope for with Savage, because last year was a bit of a struggle, is that the safety position in Joe Barry's defense, it's a difficult one. Like, everything that they're tasked with to do, playing the cover two, having to be, play such an important role in the run game. It's a difficult position within that defense. And when you have someone like Adrian Amos, who puts the word safe and safety, he's Mr. Reliable, he's a veteran. That transition for him is, as we saw, is probably going to be relatively more easy than a third-year player like Darnell Savage coming into a brand new system. So I'm hoping that having that year under his belt, another offseason with it, we'll start to see, that playmaking Darnell Savage that, we saw at Maryland.
We could see that. We'll see a lot of other things here as we get through the offseason. He's Paul Bretl. I'm Jacob Westendorf. You guys are done with me for a little while at least. Well, we'll see. Andy Herman is back tomorrow for you guys that are watching this, and we'll have a group going here in the next couple of weeks. Draft stuff starts here on the Pack a Day podcast soon too, so I'll be with a different team. Paul, are you and Mark and Jason sticking together through that, or did you get reassigned?
Nope, it'll be us three.
There you go. So at 3, you guys can have your weather report every week and Mark Eccles storytelling and Jason
Yes.
and Paul's general nonsense. So appreciate that. Appreciate you guys watching with me. Check out the podcast at Pack a Day Podcast. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Jacob Westendorf. You can follow Paul. He's at Paul_Bretl, Bretl. Find his work over Cheesehead TV, Dairyland Express. You can find me, Packer Report, Game On Wisconsin. Check out the Green Bay Draft Guide. Go to Game On Wisconsin, Game On WI on Twitter. Find the link for that, less than $10, and you can get yourself a draft guide. We're out of time. Thank you guys for listening. We'll see